Coming into this season, I honestly thought the Charlotte Hornets would be the worst team in the NBA. Strictly just based off the talent that I thought was there as a team that was the 9th seed in the East last year and then lost their two leading scorers without much replacement, this team was going to be bad. I mean, they did bring in Terry Rozier in the offseason, and some people had high hopes for what he would do now that he was out of Boston, but I just thought that all he would bring was a bit of really inefficient offense. But little did we all know that it wasn't Rozier that would be the breakout guard for Charlotte this season, but instead it would be second-year player Devonte Graham, a guy that averaged less than 15 minutes and 5 points per game last year as a second-round rookie, a player that wasn't highly recruited out of high school, originally committed to a non-Power 5 school, but worked his butt off on his way to an outstanding 4-year career at Kansas, and now he is, arguably, the biggest surprise player in the NBA so far this season. So how exactly did we get here? What has caused this huge breakout from a guy that I'm sure a lot of NBA fans barely even knew existed before this season? Well, I'm going to be telling that story today, and I have a bit of a unique perspective on this because I've played against Devonte Graham. Okay, so let's back up a bit here to 2012. Graham was playing basketball at Broughton High School in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is pretty close to where I grew up and also coincidentally where I took the SAT and showed up 2 minutes late and almost forced the entire room to have to retake the exam. And this is also a school whose basketball history includes former Duke forward Shavlik Randolph and current Clippers guard Jerome Robinson, who I also played against and was Graham's high school teammate. On a separate note, North Carolina high school basketball is crazy. I've seen Chris Clemens and Gary Clark as high schoolers. I watched Brandon Ingram play all the way back when he was a sophomore. My high school team beat Laney High School in a playoff game, aka where Michael Jordan went to high school, and they showed up in all this really nice Jordan brand gear. And I even got to see the Thon Maker hype train near its peak when his Canadian team came to play in an annual holiday tournament at Broughton, which is always a huge event. Anyway, back in 2012, my high school team and Broughton played in a scrimmage, and going into the game, I knew who Graham was. He'd been a pretty good guard for them the years prior, but I certainly wasn't thinking at the time that I was watching a future NBA player or anything. That year, Graham's senior season, he led Broughton to the state title game and ultimately got the attention of a few solid Division I programs before committing to Appalachian State, a school that is known as a football powerhouse within its own conference, as the team that famously beat Michigan in the Big House and spent most of this season ranked in the top 25 nationally. However, after committing to App State, Graham decided to take a prep year at Brewster Academy, and this is when his basketball career really started taking off. He had a great year at Brewster, leading them to a state championship, and suddenly the bigger schools became interested. Ultimately, Graham committed to Kansas, and just 2.5 years after I was playing against this guy in high school and not really thinking too much of him at the time, he was a rotation guard at a Power 5 school. But before Graham ever actually committed to Kansas, there was actually a pretty big controversy surrounding his recruiting process, because initially when he committed to App State, he didn't just verbally commit, but he actually signed his letter of intent, which is essentially a binding contract for him to go and play basketball there. And then when he played so well at Brewster and all these other top schools, whether they be in-state or out-of-state Power 5 schools like Kansas, ended up coming around and saying, hey, we want this guy to play on our team. He's actually a lot better than we thought he would be. He still was committed contractually to play at App State. And naturally, everybody wanted something out of this situation. App State wanted to keep this guy that they recruited that ended up getting a lot better before he ever showed up to campus. They didn't want to release him from his letter of intent. Graham found some other schools that he would have rather attended and played basketball at that were bigger schools that he felt like he would get a better opportunity at. And these other schools just really wanted a player that suddenly was really good. And it actually ended up being a pretty long process, and there was a lot of outrage about the fact that App State wouldn't release Graham from his letter of intent. And then on the other hand, there were plenty of people saying, well, the guy committed, he should go there even though he's gotten a lot better, and it would actually be really cool for App State to have a player as good as Graham. But at the end of the day, they did end up releasing him from his letter of intent, allowing him to open up his recruitment once again. And as I said, there were a couple of schools involved, including my own NC State Wolfpack, but ultimately he ended up at Kansas. And honestly, if that was where the story ended for him, it still would have been pretty impressive. As talented as a lot of North Carolina high school basketball players are, it's relatively uncommon for public school players, especially guards like Graham, to get an offer to a big-time Power 5 school. I mentioned Chris Clemons earlier, and he was a scoring machine at Millbrook High School, but didn't get as much interest initially due to his size, so he committed to Campbell University, where he went on to become the third leading scorer in Division I history. So for Graham to end up at Kansas was a pretty big accomplishment in itself. But he didn't stop there. He quickly established himself as a solid point guard with great shooting touch from three-point range and became an incredibly accomplished college player, winning the Big 12 tournament MVP as a sophomore, second team All-Big 12 as a junior, and first team All-Big 12, Big 12 Player of the Year, and first team All-American as a senior. After college, he entered the 2018 NBA draft where he was predicted to be selected in the second round. Here's part of his evaluation from NBADraft.net. He's a player of average positional size and athleticism. That paired with his age will hurt where he will get selected, but many prospects in this draft don't have the amount of NBA translatable skills Graham possesses. A likely role player, Devonte will certainly be in the mix in the second round this season and has the ability to stick with the team given the right opportunity. Ultimately, Graham went 34th overall and ended up with the Hornets, and as I said earlier, as a rookie, he was only a small contributor to an average Hornets team. Coming into this season, however, it was clear that Graham would take on more offensive responsibility on a team in desperate need of scoring, but nobody really could have seen this coming. Well, actually, that isn't necessarily the case. There were signs that Graham would be a good NBA player. He shot over 700 threes in college at over 40% for his career and committed less than 300 turnovers in over 140 college games compared to over 600 assists. And Kansas won at least 30 games in 3 of his 4 college seasons. So he was highly effective in 2 areas that can make a player have a long, successful NBA career as a role player: great three-point shooting and efficient playmaking. But what has happened to him since has exceeded the expectations of just a role player. And now, with the scoring average that's been around 20 a game for most of the season, as well as a pretty high assist number, Graham has gone from a supposed role player to an offensive focal point. So how exactly has this happened for him? Going from a role player to an offensive focal point isn't easy in the NBA, but Graham has done it with one simple rule: just shoot a ton of threes. Graham currently ranks in the top 10 in the NBA in threes attempted and is making nearly 43% of them, which is just absolutely insane. I talked about this in an SL show in which I highlighted Graham's breakout to begin this season, but if he were to keep up those numbers of shooting over 8 threes a game at 40% or higher, he would join Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Ray Allen as the only players ever to do that in NBA history. But even with those incredible shooting numbers, he does have more to his game. But that shooting ability is what sets up everything else. He uses the threat of his three-point shot to get to the rim on ball screens or when attacking closeouts, though his finishing ability at the rim and ability to get to the free throw line still need improvement, but has shown an ability to set up his teammates with a pretty efficient assist-to-turnover ratio. And that assist number is even more impressive when you consider that this is a Charlotte team without a ton of talent outside of him and a few other guys. Now, it is still early and he could always fall off statistically, but that doesn't take anything away from what this guy has done in his career so far. To go from just a good high school player to a Power 5 Player of the Year to a second-round draft pick and now to a potential Most Improved Player award winner, and if you want to go further, Dark Horse All-Star candidate, Devonte Graham has been an amazing surprise. And this story teaches us that we never really know what a player will turn into once they get to the NBA. Back in 2012, I certainly didn't think that I was playing against a guy that would go to a Power 5 school, much less win Player of the Year and become an offensive focal point in the NBA. And obviously not many other people thought that either, considering his college recruiting process. Some players just have immediately translatable NBA skills when they get to the league, and Graham has done about as good of a job as anybody when it comes to maximizing what he does best on a team that desperately needs what he can provide. And Graham's story also shows us the continued value of 4-year college players. Too often, guys like him slip to the second round simply because people don't think that they'll develop any further once they get to the NBA. Their past might not have been the typical one-and-done, highly drafted freshman route that seems to dominate the NBA draft process now, but that doesn't mean that they can't still have incredibly long and productive careers. And for me personally, it's really cool to see this kind of success come to a guy like Graham. Like, there are other guys in the league right now that I got to see in person or played against in my same high school graduating class because I'm at that age now where I can watch NBA games and realize that some of these dudes are the same age as me. But for somebody from Raleigh to go from under-recruited and overlooked every step of the way to turning heads on his way to a potential NBA All-Star season, Devonte Graham is truly one of the best stories of the early NBA season. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.